It's time for another episode of Off the Record, On the Rocks. Join Michael Toner and Ankarina Lara and break down the latest news on all things crypto, metaverse, and Web3, filtering out noise and connecting dots as we pour ourselves into the future.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another Off the Record, On the Rocks with my good friend, Mr. Ankarina Lara. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing great despite the May gray that's outside here in Southern California. We're just hoping we don't have that much June gloom.
Buy in May and go away. We are in our last recording of May 2023, sticking on our Thursday rotation, which has kind of worked out for us. Fridays are definitely one to watch with the headlines getting buried into the weekend. I think as we came off of the recording last week, we were getting some interesting news about the XRP potential ruling and that the coming to fruition. That kind of got buried last weekend. You also had Ripple appointing Warren Jensen to its board of directors. We'll get into Mr. Jensen coming over from Amazon, now going to work at Ripple and XRP. So real deep in the crypto regulation, what's happening there. And here we are heading into the last weekend in May. You know, next time we record, it will be June, Memorial Day weekend, holiday weekend here in the States. What gets buried tomorrow? And then I'll leave us with this, you know, who's stealing the narrative today? None other than Elon Musk and Ron DeSantis, having used Twitter Spaces yesterday to announce Ron DeSantis running for president, using Twitter Spaces, and it is all anybody is talking about today. What's your hot take on everything we've got to get through?
Well, my first hot take, but just to talk about Elon and DeSantis, is it felt to me like the first time that the thing that we know, that we've always known to be true, that corporate America fully backs candidates for elected positions, often funneling massive amounts of money into their coffers, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally over the years, right? We've had plenty of experiences with this. It felt like for the first time, corporate America, in the form of Elon Musk, was actually aligning themselves very publicly with a candidate. The fits and starts notwithstanding, I actually didn't get a chance to listen to the entire thing. But it felt like, for the first time, a challenge, right? A challenge to CNN, a challenge to CNBC, a challenge to Fox, a challenge to everyone who is a conventionalist, that this election is going to be everything but conventional. And we're going to start to see the corporate players. Elon's just the first who happens to have this fun little new toy called Twitter Spaces. But gosh, there's going to be more, right? What prevents guys like Bezos? What prevents guys like Cook? What prevents all these guys, all these gals who are CEOs of companies from just stepping in potentially and becoming a candidate? Like, I thought, and my first reaction was, oh my God, Elon Musk is going to run as vice president. Now, of course, as a non-American, you can't do that for vice president and for president. But it starts to beg the question, perhaps you can be appointed, right? You could become a Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of State. You could be a cabinet member. You're throwing your hat in the ring. So to me, all these things were swirling. I was like, whoa, it just kind of overwhelmed me.
Well, put a pin in that of all of those corporate America who have big wallets, who want to now come into politics because now there's a platform to do it. We're going to need proper disclosures around those candidacies. I think you also sent me the thing about Kennedy accepting Bitcoin, so officially the first presidential candidate.
Huge.
We called this 18 months ago. We saw it coming. I want to stick on the Twitter Spaces for a second, I want to zoom out. We have long talked about here on this show Twitter as the original metaverse. Your description of walking down that Twitter hallway and choosing which door to go down, it sticks with me. It's such a strong visual. It is why, and something I know I texted to you the other day, like, Twitter is the only social platform, the only known social platform in our history to have ushered in Arab Spring and to have played a role in the questioning of governments, right? This is a decade ago. This isn't new. we've seen the power of Twitter when you give a communication vehicle, a mass communication vehicle, a metaverse, a persistent town hall where people can show up and speak directly to, in this case, fast forward, Elon bought Twitter, brings on Ron DeSantis to announce his presidential candidacy. I logged into it despite the FUD that you're seeing from the traditional media players. You know, CNN, Fox, everybody's calling it a shit show on Twitter Spaces, that the technical difficulties. I'm telling you, by the time I logged in, I was a few minutes late. I didn't even know that there had been technical difficulties. I also have spent a decent amount of time on Twitter Spaces, and I know sometimes it's difficult to kind of get going. Here you had, you know, I think now the replay, at least of the Twitter Spaces, is up to 4 or 5 million people, concurrent listeners, who can come off mute if they want and ask a question to somebody. This is a new moment in American politics, in politics maybe across the world, where leaders are going to be able to step onto a Twitter space and have a dialogue directly with anyone who wants to come up and ask them a question, and you disintermediate the need for presidential town halls sponsored by Fox News and CNN doing sit-down interviews. Here's old Elon just said, hit go on the Twitter Spaces. And Ron, what do you got to tell the people? And he did.
You know what? Take that, Clubhouse. Right on the chin. Like, what happened to those guys? Clubhouse was supposed to be
they missed
where
it.
all this was going to get launched. And now Twitter Spaces, the all audio platform, and then there'll be the new Twitter, Windows, which will be the all video platform. And like you said, it's a little
the
bit,
X app.
The X app, right? These are the foundations that are being laid. And what I find really amazing about that too is you also disintermediate the need for the approved by both sides and also usually celebrity interviewer, right? There's usually someone who's a named person. Since now, like, everybody who's a named journalist is just getting fired left and right from these different, networks. Like, you can't have Don Lemon interview him. You can't have Tucker Carlson interview him because they're just gone. Actually, you could have them interview him in Twitter, but not on those old platforms, right? And then you also remove the need to have questions in advance and topics that you quote unquote can't talk about, because if Ron doesn't want to answer, he just says, I'm not answering that. And it's Twitter Spaces and not CNN, so it doesn't come off as like a rebuff to the left or whatever. And then further, and I'll take this one last point, is you can't really, well, I won't say can't, but in this example, there isn't a giant network selling ads and making a bunch of money on this, because follow that money, right? Who's going to come on to CNN Town Hall? Who's going to be the featured advertiser? Okay, Allstate. Okay, whatever. This is just a part of the vehicle which the corporate America uses, these different products like, government interviews as a package to sell ads around. So you strip all of that away. Who knows? In the future, maybe Twitter Spaces ends up having ads on the platform because Elon wants to do advertisements. Who knows? Maybe Twitter Spaces with Ron DeSantis Part 2 is just fully sponsored by Tesla. I mean, it's suddenly everything is up for grabs. So
he said he was going to start running ads, right?
That's right. It's just as this, like, hey, by the way, my friend Ron just came here in a Tesla. Why? He could just drop that as a subtle thing. But this suddenly changes the entire playing field. So now, for me, the next question, as I said before, is, well, who's next? Right? Like, is there going to be a next? Is there going to be a Twitch government interview of some form, a Twitch presidential debate? Is there going to be you start to pick a YouTube? Like, are we going to see all the non-networks who have streaming ability of audio and video coming out and saying, hey, we want to play? If Elon can do it, so can we. So that's, for me, is like, what's going to be the next follow? Will it be Elon with a second presidential candidate? Or will it be another streaming network with a candidate? I think it might have to be like the plurality. I think there's going to be a lot of noise these next 12 months.
I mean, I think it's why Twitter is so well positioned in that, because what you just described were sort of these silos of social networks, YouTube versus Twitch versus Twitter. But what sets Twitter apart is that you could just tweet out a link to my YouTube stream, to my Twitch stream, to all of my other platforms. It is that true metaverse. And I want to zoom out even a little bit. I mean, I came from Arab Spring, Twitter, rocking democracies. We came all the way through to Elon, the first time a presidential campaign has disintermediated the mainstream media. It happened on Twitter Spaces. that will go down, in the history books. I think people will look back at it for all the reasons we're describing, not so much of the occasion and the evening itself, but more so all of the threads that it represents in the changing world from a technology perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a payments perspective. We didn't even talk about this. We mentioned Kennedy accepting Bitcoin, but on the next Twitter Spaces, the moment you're able to hit that heart, and that heart is connected to my Doge wallet, and I'm giving 0.002. I'm literally putting my money. We talked about this. You and I played this scenario through 18 months ago when we were talking about how cryptocurrency enters politics and how candidates could maximize it. And now you talk about community on a Twitter Spaces live event. I got to hear the guy. The guy is absolutely, in my mind, a racist, but he was extremely well spoken on Twitter Spaces. I can say both of those confidently, as maybe silly as it sounds, but I got to hear his voice. I haven't heard the other candidates come onto Twitter Spaces, and frankly, I would personally be nervous if Joe Biden got on a Twitter Spaces and tried to take those kinds of questions in real time. I mean, that's an honest take right there of the changing narrative, the vehicles and the channels that now corporations and or candidates can take, and the way the money can now be transferred to support those candidates. That's the XApp. There it is. You can do everything without leaving your Twitter space.
Yeah, and that's something that I thought might have been a missed opportunity a little bit from DeSantis, which is, he talked about cryptocurrency. I think it was generally, I don't think there was ever a specific moment that he said, yes, I am pro Bitcoin. I will take Bitcoin as a donation platform. Like, he didn't quite go that far. I think that Kennedy did scoop him on that, which is surprising to me because based on the rhetoric that's been coming out, we've been covering this, and I love, just that Bitcoin's going to be on the ballot. You always say that Bitcoin's on the ballot, and we've been saying that for months and months and months. And I always assumed it would manifest as a GOP candidate saying, I am taking Bitcoin for donations, so somehow, some way. I honestly thought it would have been DeSantis because he's so anti-central bank digital currency, so anti-CBDC. And at least the party lines are starting to become clear where CBDCs feel like a Democratic thing and Bitcoin, or at least anti-CBDCs, feels like a Republican thing. But then you have our pal Kennedy Jr. Let's not let a generation of people forget the name Kennedy the same way that like our kids don't even know the name Michael Jordan, right? There's a whole generation of people who are 30 years old and under, the edge of millennial to Gen Zs, who if you press them, 100 of them in a room as to like who Michael Jordan was and who JFK was, they could probably give you one data point about each of them that they've learned in their like history books and classes. Why is this person important? And you might even get the second response like, oh, it's a fancy shoe. It's like, no, it's a person. So it's really crazy to me that Kennedy gets his name back into the public eye, the narrative, and he's a Democrat, right? Of course, I'm a Kennedy, but he's an anti-vaxxing Democrat who loves Bitcoin. I'm like, whoa. And then he's up there saying, and I'm the first to take Bitcoin. He's making a huge deal about it. He's taking all that news. Talk about stealing a narrative. I was like, wow, Robert Kennedy Jr., where did you come from? Who are you? And why aren't you on Twitter Spaces next? Or like the Joe Rogan show or something. Like, these guys are going to start to use platforms that are unconventional, right? We already know candidate Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan. A whole cadre of crazies go through there. Now Elon's got DeSantis on his platform. What's the next interesting channel of the metaverse that is going to have the next battle fought? We always talked about World War III, World War IV will pick it, right?
Happening in the metaverse.
The battle for Web3, the battle for crypto will be fought in the metaverse. Now I'm starting to feel like the battle for literally every future anything, including the presidential nomination, is going to be fought in the metaverse. It actually is not going to be fought under the normal rubric of like what's happening in the physical world right now, Whoa. Geopolitical or otherwise. It's going to be in the metaverse.
Yeah, I mean, everything we've just talked about, that's all digital. You can go listen to the recording. It happened live. I was there live. It was a very surreal moment. I'm like scrolling through. There's 200,000 little avatars that I'm scrolling through in these little bubbles, and I see Caitlin Collins from CNN, and I'm like, I literally paused and was like, oh, she's in the same room I am in. She is a CNN journalist who didn't have access to hearing that press conference the way she typically would, other than she had the same access that I did. And I think that democratization of information, Elon has been harking about truth. He's been harking about humans. We've talked about this in the world of generative AI, the need to be able to prove humanity. That blue check mark was like, rewind in your head 60, 90 days ago, that whole like, I'm charging $9.99 and it's a blue check mark. And it was like all this bullshit in the news of like, why is he doing that? Well, guess why? Because all those little blue check marks that showed up were real people with real credit cards and a real Twitter Spaces account to sit there and listen. And so now he's got accurate data on who these people are. I mean, there's a whole nother place to go to talk about like how he can monetize that data, how the candidates, it looks like Ron DeSantis is going to get the first crack at remarketing to, those folks on your FYP page on Twitter. It's going to feed you. The algorithm's going to feed you. If it's wild to go down that path.
It is wild, and it starts to remind me of all the legendary moments in tech history where the disruptive leader comes with a slogan or a symbol that sort of represents the zeitgeist of the times. I'm thinking about Mark Benioff, who famously has these stickers that just say the word software with a big red line through it, right? No software, even though software is going to eat the world. These sort of like these big moments where the contrarian flags. And I feel like Elon is just a few minutes away from rolling out like bots, BOTS, with a big line through it, like bots no longer allowed. We are humans in the metaverse. There will be no, AI, please identify yourself. Oh, don't look at these Tesla bots. We're going to talk out of both sides of our mouth, of course. In Twitter Spaces, in my X app, no bots. But look at these cool Tesla bots. You can have one in your house for $3,000. It's going to become this interesting splitting of hairs. What is the metaverse supposed to be occupied by humans? Is it supposed to be occupied by modified, augmented humans in their reality? Is it supposed to be a virtual avatar departure? It's starting to feel like Elon's version of the metaverse, which, as we said, it was always the original Twitter. It's a place where humans go down the hall, where bots are not tolerated, especially not by Elon, and you go into a room, like you said, democratized. And Caitlin, who's in there listening alongside of you, and she wants to ask a question, well, she has to hit raise my hand the same damn way as you do. Yeah. And Elon might not call on her. He might say, Toner, what's your question? Not Caitlin. And suddenly, wow, what is a journalist's name mean? Except for their relationship to some kind of a publishing outlet. It's wild. Talk about democracy.
I'm going to try to take you mentioned the generative AI. We're talking about bots, the need for those humans. I'm going to make this my segue to get into a couple of other topics here. One that stood out to me yesterday, talk about generative AI, but this is NVIDIA. We've talked about in the world of the metaverse in terms of the tech required and the computer chips required. It's kind of funny how that tech headline was the story around Twitter Spaces, because it takes really a lot of computing power to broadcast audio in real time to that many end users. But I digress. Back to NVIDIA. They're making computer chips to build the metaverse, right? These computer chips that are capable of doing generative AI and edge computing processing. And NVIDIA had one of the craziest, if not, I think might go down as the single biggest swing in publicly traded history. Don't quote me, I could be wrong, but it's somewhere close, like a 28% jump. I mean, for a mega cap like NVIDIA, for their stock to soar the way it did, it is a straight parabolic line up. This tells you everyone sees, oh, the metaverse is coming. It is the combination of AI, generative AI, blockchain technology, metaverse platforms, payment rails, payment systems. All of this stuff is going to take those computer chips to get it done. NVIDIA is approaching $1 trillion valuation. I mean, what's your take?
I mean, it's fitting, right? Because NVIDIA powers so many of the devices that are going to need to render the metaverse, as well as generate the metaverse. I didn't know about this story until you told me this story. NVIDIA has been in my world for the last 3 decades. Because ever since I started in PC gaming at GameSpot, you have NVIDIA being a key player in producing graphics cards for all the biggest computers, including Apple platforms for a period of time, as well as PCs, to render the 3D environments that have become kind of standard, at least I think what the people recognize as something that's metaverse like, right? Exploring 3D environments.
Right.
And why all at once does it rip? So someone knows something, right? Must be a pretty massive deal that's going down. Apple has an announcement that's happening next week, right? When we record next week, it will likely be either during or
right after,
immediately before, during or right after the Cupertino event. Which, if they announce something like, "Well, the Apple XR goggles feature the NVIDIA blank chip," we'll know the fix is in. If all of a sudden we hear that the new studio where all the Call of Duty guys have gone to say, "Well, we're doubling down on the NVIDIA blah 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 system," then we'll know that fix was in. When we hear about the next redux of the new generative AI, one of the things that caught my attention for this was Adobe. And Adobe is right in there. And Adobe,
Copilot.
We all know Adobe and NVIDIA are pals. They have been for a long time. These are guys who are across the street from each other in Silicon Valley, down in Sunnyvale. I mean, I know that. I used to occupy that part of the world. So when you think about that, and the Adobe, I think about just the parlor trick. And I don't mean to take any offense against any of these companies by saying this, but you see these commercials during the NBA basketball finals where you have Antetokounmpo with some actor, and they're talking and taking pictures, and there's some unwanted person in the background, and he's like, "Don't worry," and he just sort of circles them or taps them and they disappear, right? And everyone's like, "Wow, Google Pixel has software, I guess, not hardware, that makes things disappear." Is that even about the phone? What is this ad telling me? And then, boom, Adobe just says, "Hey, we have this thing called Copilot, by the way. You're going to be able to just type in, 'Hey, remove that guy from the background and change the grass to purple, and I need a dystopian sky that looks like a Fortnite storm.'" And then, done. And now you've not spent 6 hours trying to find the right alternative tool use of the blur brush in some insane UI of what has become Photoshop and Illustrator. I'm telling you, I've used those programs for a long time, for decades, and they're unusable. Oh, they're so complicated unless you've gone to all the classes.
There's hundreds of features and buttons, and I mean, I watched again, to make light of it, but I watched a hilarious TikTok video of a true professional graphic designer experimenting with this Adobe Copilot, circling an image and extending the beach background, and the way this put his head in his hands and just recognizing the fleeting timeline that designers are going to have here, because this is from Tuesday. The headline: Adobe unveils future of Creative Cloud with generative AI as a creative co-pilot in Photoshop. This is the start of the company's major initiative to integrate generative AI into existing creative workflows across Creative Cloud. So they turned the switch. Do you think they just came up with this last night? Do you think they just figured it out? No, these designers have been doing this shit for the last year, while Adobe in the background was like, "Oh, we're just going to let the AI do all the Photoshop work." It is mind-blowing, but think Apple coming in now, coming in with an AI. Think Adobe coming in, where now you can generate those metaverses. You can use AI to create the scene. And I'll come back around the other direction when they talk about brands. Adobe getting into the generative AI, we often blur these things between what's been happening in Web3 and cryptocurrency and metaverse and now generative AI, but take it from the complete other side. I started at the top by talking about the Ripple appointing Warren Jensen to the board of directors. So Warren Jensen was the former CFO and operations leader at Amazon. He also spent time at Delta, NBC, Electronic Arts, and now he's going to Ripple as the CFO. Ripple oversees XRP. Is that not yet another example of this crossover from corporate America stepping into the crypto world? That makes me think regulations coming, the environment, as we've been talking about, the pillars that we've been talking about, getting stood up? Why would this guy leave Amazon to go over to XRP, meme coin company, if he didn't know that the environment was going to allow him to continue to be a CFO? And if now I can generate stuff in my Adobe Copilot, I can publish it in my Apple goggles using my NVIDIA chip, and I can pay for it with my XRP token using my Apple Pay wallet, you see how these things come together. I always like to try to tie how we are making sense of these things are all part of a technological advancement where they're all colliding, all pieces of this. So
they're colliding, and something about that I think is really fascinating is what we know that there's indicators, right? When somebody who's really famous and really important, who stands to make a lot of money, continuing to do what they do, and they decide to leave, there is something that they know that we don't, or we're going to soon know, right? We saw this before with Activision. Would the FTC block, the actual acquisition by Microsoft? We don't know, but gosh, one of the highest paid, most influential guys from there leaves and joins a Web3 company. Kind of an indicator that it's going to be blocked, and that's sort of where it went. So this guy Jensen coming over from Amazon, to me, suddenly gives an absolute validation to the fact that Ripple XRP has a use. And what you were just describing now makes me wonder, the same way that like Coinbase, when they were starting to go pre-IPO, what do? Well, they start poaching, heads of marketing from Facebook and Instagram, from Meta. They start going out and grabbing all these key people who want to try to take this next step in their career and expand. And then you start to see, well, then, gosh, there's all these new features and products that Coinbase rolls out. So when I think about Jensen coming over there, the question for me is, all right, is XRP and Ripple going to become an underlying cryptocurrency for use with Amazon for buying real products? Because it doesn't really matter ultimately, right? We've known that Meta has been looking for a blockchain. They tried to create one, Libra, and kind of abandoned it. That Amazon's been looking and exploring. All these companies are looking and exploring. Some have said we align with Polygon. It's the cross-chain thing. Others have identified, metal and other sort of random ones. But maybe there's a play where we see suddenly, like you said, that becomes the payment fulfillment a blockchain of the Amazon of Amazon network as it pertains to Apple. But then at the same time, it's so fascinating because Apple, while they sell products, right? Amazon sells lots of real world products, right? They haven't really gone to the metaverse yet, right? We haven't seen them turn on virtual products at scale. Apple sells real products. They also sell apps and software. But Apple now is positioned to sell the creative generative products, or to create ways to create derivative products. That's something that, Apple's never going to be Amazon, right? They're never going to sell you peanut butter and diapers. And Amazon's probably never going to sell you XR goggles that aren't Apple's. And yet, if you are in the business of using generative AI, and we've seen the power with Adobe, I think the Apple story comes out where suddenly there is a Copilot-esque feature for GarageBand. There's a Copilot-esque feature for Final Cut Pro. For all these new softwares where now you don't actually need a full band of people to create music, right? You don't need a set and actors to create movies. The same way you don't need to have really been in Rio de Janeiro, when the volcano erupted, because it never happened, because there's no volcano there. But gosh, this amazing photo that I just created that cut out hours and hours of my own time. So I feel like it's a lot of things I just said, but I feel like Apple is about to make an announcement that's going to eclipse Adobe, and Amazon's going to make an announcement that's just going to eclipse Facebook in terms of its big alliances and big crypto partnerships, big AI. That's the story.
I mean, there's so much to unpack there. So Microsoft made the big, what was the 60 Bs in OpenAI. And now in Microsoft Word, right, there are /AI commands where it can generate the document for you inside of Microsoft Teams, inside of Microsoft Office, inside of Microsoft Excel. Now you're seeing Adobe, and the way I read that headline, it didn't really occur to me, but we just were thinking about it as Photoshop. But Adobe makes Adobe Premiere. They make Adobe Audition. There's audio, there's video, there's 3D gaming platform tools inside of that Creative Cloud. Apple, like you said, they've got their Keynote, they've got their own, Sheets, they've got GarageBand, they've got tools to create, and are widely recognized for those tools to create. One of which is Xcode, their AR platform. These So that's another piece. We're coming into my world around this generative 3D and AR. We've touched on it as we talk about metaverse and gaming platforms, but that to me is where I'm going to be able to build while I'm inside of augmented reality. While I'm looking through my goggles and seeing it on my desk, I'm going to be able to say, "Hey Siri, create me a yellow guitar, with 12 strings." And it's going to be able to generate it, and then I'm going to be able to play it. That it now has utility. It's not just the image of it. It's not just the graphic of it. It's going to do something. Something else we've talked about too here is like, talk about the metaverse. We talk about crypto. We always have to bring this back to the shit people care about, and that's entertainment, and music, and games, and the things that people actually do with their time. All that comes back into focus next Monday in Cupertino. I've seen the WWDC announcements. I've seen that they've invited the XR media. People making a big fuss about that. I'm like, this is not surprising. That to me explains the fixes in with NVIDIA, the bump in that. I wanted to come back to one other thing you just said. When you talked about creating an image, a generative AI image, and you didn't have to be in Rio de Janeiro or wherever you said. The one thing we didn't talk about, and it barely made the news,
The fake Pentagon fire.
Yeah, and the market did take a dip, but it came right back up. And my wife asked me, she's like, "How come I didn't see that on CNN?" And I was like, my guess is that the main news networks probably chose not to run the story as fervently as they may have because of the potential confusion given the market scenario right now. People are hearing about AI. There's been that Pope photo with the white puffy jacket. There was the Trump got arrested photo. It's literally like training the public to understand these things are fake. And this one was like too close to home, literally, to say, no, it's fake, because the market actually did tank. So it didn't matter whether it was real or fake. This comes back to
the next
proof of humanity.
Fought in the metaverse. It's proof of humanity.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's both those things. It's the world ID. There's so many different companies and different interests who are trying to brand what we're just describing, the no bots. Like, we're trying to describe this world where you can identify. It's the the Blade Runner future. Can you look at something and instantly know it's synthetic? Or do you have to sit and interview it? And does a replicant? Do you have to spend real time to figure it out? And I also wonder too about just the weaponization of what you're describing, because I could imagine that if this was a photo of the Pentagon on fire that hit, let's just say 4 years ago, 3 years ago, when you have Trump in office and you have the GOP running things, well, CNN is probably more interested in running a story like that to show how fragile the administration is, and it's like unwillingness to believe of, you know what I mean? It can be utilized for something negative, whereas in this case, gosh, if CNN is basically a branch of the liberal news apparatus, then why would they ever want to run anything that would suggest anything bad about the stock market? Especially if it's not something that's totally founded on anything besides a tweet. It's very dangerous what they're handling, and I think they hopefully know that, because look, we talk about entertainment. Talk about these photographs, how easy it is to fake an image, the Pope, Trump, etc. Images are literally not going to be trusted, and this is, and we talked about this last week. Something I still hold on to very high value is the future of entertainment. Let's not even use that. The future of communication will be high value on live. That something, if it's not live, it's going to
AKA
be
Twitter
very,
Spaces.
very difficult to say that it hasn't been adulterated in some way, shape, or form, right? Everything, even the Twitter Spaces replay that has been listened to 4 million times, could be monkeyed with, right? It's something about the real time. Now, there's probably a future where AI will be able to manipulate things in real time so well that we won't be able to see it or notice it. That's a horrible, dark future that I'm sure we're headed towards. But as it stands today, you can't really do that, right? So I think live events, Twitter Spaces is obviously where it's going to be. Things that are photos of something that happened, people are just not going to believe. Out of the gate, you'll say well, obviously it's been doctored in some way, shape, or form. I think, all casually know that based on like the covers of magazines that people see at the supermarket, right? Here's a celebrity. God, she's so beautiful and skinny. Well, in real life, she's not. It's just modified for the photo. And everything that we see, whether it's online or in print, I think people are going to question. And it gets to the point of the entertainment that you made, which is you can go back to every single movie that's been made with AI, right? All the famous ones. And with enough little quick processing, say, well, I'd like to see the movie Die Hard, but with Johnny Depp instead of Bruce Willis. And you'll be able to watch it, the entire movie, that way. And so suddenly bespoke content out of generative AI is going to become the norm. So if that becomes the norm, then anything that's been pre-recorded will no longer be trusted. Like, as soon as you can show people with something they like, then they'll understand across everything else they don't like. This is what I'm saying.
I'm looking right now. This is something that didn't really occur to me, but there was an interview this week. You may know who it was. It was some Apple executive, and he was talking about Apple's streaming partnership with MLS. So take everything you just said about the importance of live. I've been calling this for at least a year now, which was Ted Lasso and Apple and the filming of that show, the using special cameras, special techniques, and we've talked about here on this show about I'm going to be able to watch that show or think about it as a soccer game from this seat. You're going to be able to watch it from the presidential suite, and my kid's going to be able to watch it from, standing on top of the goalpost. We're all going to be able to watch it live, but customizing, call it generating the version of the game that I want to watch. He talked about that in this interview. I forget exactly who it was. When I heard it, I was like, man, really feels like he's teasing something, and he's teeing Tim up for next week, something about the MLS. Voila, there you go. When I can put those XR goggles on, and immediately that MLS streaming deal can be done in augmented reality, and I could be sitting on the goal line when I watch the game from my living room and spinning my head around to see the players behind me and walking up to the coaches and walking up to the sideline while I'm in my living room. I mean, that's going to be the experience that Apple's going to be able to bring to live events, namely MLS soccer.
Well, I mean, and I have personal experience with this, and this is 5-6 years ago now, with full headsets, so full VR, not augmented. 4 of us sitting on a couch in someone's living room, all with wired-in headsets. This was a partnership that TNT and the NBA had to do a version of virtual reality of the game, watching a Lakers-Warriors basketball game, and you can sit in one of 4 locations, from either behind one of the baskets on the left, behind the other basket on the right, on the sideline dead center, or up in the box. And just like you described, what they did is they just mounted one of those little sort of robot tripods they bought a ticket and basically built it into the chair, where it's one of these little things that has a 360 camera around it, and it's not super tall, so it's not obscuring people's view, but it allows you, what you just described, to sit in your chair. Now, you can't walk up and talk to the coach and can't walk around because obviously it's a fixed little camera, at least it was, but you can fully turn around and see the fans behind you, the real humans who are at the event. You can watch the players run up and down. It wasn't 4K, right? It was maybe 720p. It was a little grainy. It kind of had that like really good video game quality to it. Maybe not like exactly perfect. But again, 5-6 years ago in full VR. So yes, what you're describing is just the beginning of that. And then imagine what someone might pay who's a real fan, who can't get the ticket, right? Like, I was trying to get tickets down to the Crypt, which is what we call Crypto.com Arena. 2 tickets on the floor at the first Laker home game against the Nuggets was $45,000 on StubHub.
Oh my gosh.
Just think about that. Of course, that's stupid money, and that's like, who buys that? Well, the Kardashians and all their pals. But imagine a nosebleed ticket, $600-700, or pay $100 and you can be there on the court side, or just toggle a button on your app and jump up to the mezzanine suite. And you can go up in the suite and look around and see who fancy people are there in there with you. Maybe you'll see some celebrities, of course you will. This is happening. The live event, you and I have been talking about it, for both news, for commerce. Like, how about flash sales?
Yeah.
remember live sales where you used to have to respond to the guilt link that came in the email, and you knew there were 100, Versace dresses, and you had to get them while you could, but you get them for 70% off. Like that was like this. Remember the appointment buying? This is like a magic trick from digital commerce from years and years ago. But I feel like live it's going to be the battle will be fought live and in the metaverse.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's how it's going to go down.
Augmenting our reality. This is from Apple Insider. It was Eddie Q. It says Apple SVP of Services made a rare interview appearance, because even when I saw it, I was like, who is this guy? This is at the CEO Council. It was on CNBC. But he said that the MLS deal was about Apple sticking to things it could do well. And that to me tells you they thought they could do not just streaming, but sports, multi-view streaming. It was the play to get them into the XR goggles. Mark my word, next Monday we'll recap this. We'll play back the clip. But that multi-view streaming through these XR goggles, and it comes back to, what do people care about? Why would I buy those XR goggles? What do I want to watch? I care about games. And in this case, real games that take place on a real football field with Major League Soccer, and they're trying to do the same thing with Friday Night Baseball for MLB. Watch it happen.
MLB, that's going to be the crown jewel.
Now everybody wants it.
And as soon as you lock down America's pastime, and you're talking, I know they put the pitching clock on now, but still 3 to 5 hour broadcast, depending on how much offense. You're talking about a lot of dedicated time, share of minutes, share of life. Like if I am Apple, how do I make sure that I am integrated now? I'm already in your wallet. I already got your face. I'm already your communication vehicle for you and your kids with FaceTime, and you and your, work up people with messages. I'm already figuring out where you physically are. I'm here for your safety and your privacy. Gosh, he went lost in the hills hiking. Now we know where he is. Cue the drum beat. Here comes the helicopter to save the day. Apple wins again. Here's some more wearables. And now it's, well, what are you doing when you're sitting at a baseball game? Are you just grinding on your phone? Or are you paying attention? Well, now you're doing both, and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
And now Apple has that access to your leisure time.
Beyond
gaming,
cannot wait till next week to get through this. I'm gonna steamroll us through like 3 quick topics. We're gonna cover these in 3 minutes, but you mentioned crypto.com, joking about the crypt, made me think about FTX Arena. Keep this on your list of things to watch out for, but this FTX 2.0 launching soon, court filing show, reboot plan in the works. Kind of interesting, given that the news we shared earlier about XRP and new CFO, and now all of a sudden FTX is like, hey guys, don't forget about us. We want to be, we're still over here. That's one. The other one I think I saw this week, I think is one to watch. It comes back around to the regulatory side of things here in Washington. It was really 2 things. It was this Chinese city launching a government-backed metaverse platform. So that's the first time that academic institutions and enterprises in China are really being allowed to kind of set up in the metaverse, because it's now government-backed, which leads me also to happening there in APAC, South Korea passing a bill to make officials disclose Bitcoin holdings. This brings us full circle, and then I'll get your take at the very top of the show, talking about Ron DeSantis coming on Twitter Spaces to announce, why not, while I'm on that Twitter Spaces, why can't I click into DeSantis's wallet and see how many transactions he and Musk have had back and forth? How many Teslas has he bought? How many donations has he have? I want to see his Bitcoin holdings. How many coins does he have? And did he get him from old Teddy Cruz?
Yeah, and to put one last punctuation mark on it, I'd love to just take a peek at Justice Clarence Thomas's wallet and just see how many loyalty points homeboy's gotten over God knows how many illicit trips from how many illicit donors. I mean, the Koch family, the Walton family, these guys, biggest corporations in America, used to just donate money nice and quiet, behind the scenes. Yeah, let's take a cue from South Korea. Let's make every elected official have to disclose their wallets, and so that anyone who is a citizen who votes for them can observe how much are they holding, what are they interacting with, Are they familiar with XRP and Amazon? Are they familiar with Bitcoin? Are they familiar with whatever Apple's new cryptocurrency is that's going to help you navigate their version of the metaverse? Their new, their new take me out to the ball game coin, as they're going to end up rolling it in there to give you free popcorn while you're sitting there in your living room behind the dugout. It's it's a lot, and I'm so excited for next week, man.
Yeah, I'll say 30-second takes as we head in after the Memorial Day weekend. I think markets will continue to stay in a very neutral state. I think we'll look for more news coming out of the Fed in terms of rate hikes, at least pausing. I think that'll give some indication. I think then Apple will be teed up right there in that moment. We saw what it did to NVIDIA. Imagine when Apple comes with that announcement and they have their moment in time to drive that narrative forward, to bring everything we just described home. And let's see, maybe that takes us right into the next run as we head into the summer. Buy in May, go away. That's my saying.
Hey, you know what? I think I might try to go buy some Apple stock today. Not financial advice, but maybe some Apple stock and some Bitcoin before the weekend.
All right, sir. We'll leave it there. We'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week.
That's all the time we have for Off the Record, On the Rocks. Join us next week for news and all things crypto. Bring up the house lights. It's last call.